Thank you. Thank you.
And
Just ran
let
in.
me, yeah, it's great to finally, yeah. And let's start, Sas, with the latest interview that Vladimir Putin had, and in which he said Ukraine opened this Pandora's box itself. Well, then it should expect a response targeting the most vulnerable sectors of its economy, which frankly are already on their last legs. And this also applies, by the way, to agricultural products whose exports are a major source of revenue for Ukraine. How do you see? I think the latest interview, the last interview of Vladimir Putin, it brings a lot, you know, when it comes, because we know that many people are talking about that the government is not going that far, but he shows that maybe a new sort of move is in the making on the part of the Russian government. What does that mean when he talks about Pandora's box? Ukraine started that, and we're going to continue with that against them.
Well, yeah, Russia's counter-escalated, made Ukraine into a landlocked nation, by destroying the 7 ports in the Odessa Oblast. I mean, the ports are very degraded. Anything coming in and out is getting hit, regardless of whose flag is flying. And the locomotives are being destroyed, including by Russian partisans from the local population in central Ukraine. Now, what he's not saying, but what should be worrying any of your European audience, is, how should I put it nicely? You're screwed. Yeah, I think that's about the right way to put it. Because Europe, well, non-Russian Europe, the EU, is looking at 40% decline in crop yield this year from last year. That's starvation level. And Ukraine isn't going to be able to feed Europe, because that's where most of that Ukrainian grain would wind up and not going to poor countries, but winds up going to Europe, or gets resold. So the backup plan for the EU to keep at least the lower classes from quite literally starving to death is gone. At the most, with rail out of question, no shipping. You've got trucks, and trucks has been estimated at most can move about 6% of the grain, the sunflower oil, and so on, out of Ukraine. Additionally, the other areas that are being hit is steel production. That's being hit very hard. I mean, hit as in destroyed. The agriculture, obviously, agriculture actually you can't destroy it for obvious reasons. It's a huge area, but the steel is a very concentrated area. And just the fact that you can't get the product out of the country, that's $50 billion Ukraine is looking at losing. Guess who gets to fill in that hole? Yes, the starving masses in the EU get to fill in the 50 billion. So that money isn't going to go to buying more grain, because there really isn't any more grain online except for Russia. Russia's coming in. Second harvest is going to be getting collected up in September. First harvest was a record harvest. That's right. You know, Russia's out of fuel. No, it's not. And the harvest is not rotting in the field. The unfortunate part, because of this war on ships that the West started. I mean, Ukraine is its little strumpet, but that strumpet isn't going to do too much without its owners telling them what to do. The Ukrainian military is the execution portion of this organization. The decision making is Americans, British, maybe some other Europeans. But the war on shipping, the only unfortunate part in this is that Africa, parts of Africa and Southeast Asia are going to get hit very hard. There's going to be starvation because of the West. I mean, let's just keep it, aimed at who it is aimed at. It's the West, because the Western drones are being used to attack grain shipping that's coming out of Russia. And Russia, unlike Ukraine, doesn't feed the Europeans. It feeds countries like Egypt, which very going to be in a desperate situation. Many other countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So those countries and those people are going to starve to death because of the Europeans. What else is new? The West is going to be starving lots of other people to death. Nothing new under the sun. It's been this has been the repeat pattern for the last 500 years. I mean, let's not forget Churchill starved 6 million Indians to death, and I don't know how many 100 million more suffered because he just took all the rice out of Eastern India in 43 and fed the British, and I guess they burnt the rest so they couldn't eat. But he stole all the food crops out of Eastern India. I mean, this is nothing new for what the European exploitive empires have been doing for generations. And now again, there's going to be mass starvation thanks to the Europeans. Nothing new. There's your humanitarian values of the garden. Luckily, Iran, by the way, is not going to starve because the Caspian Sea is going to make sure there's enough grain coming in from Russia to keep Iran up on its legs and in the fight.
Yeah. He was asked about the objective of Ukrainian attacks, and I'm talking about Putin, and he responded, in general, the goal of Ukrainian attacks is to bring about Russia's collapse, and something they have long dreamed of and constantly talk about. Is that dream is a Ukrainian dream, or you see the backers of Ukraine are dreaming that way?
Look, Ukraine is an instrument. It's not an individual entity. It is an instrument. It is an instrument that can be used to the last Ukrainian, and then whatever shell there is discarded. So this is the dream of the West, and has been the dream of the first pan-European invasion of Russia wasn't Hitler, wasn't Napoleon, wasn't even Charles of Sweden. The first pan-European invasion of Russia was in 1012 A.D. Prince Boleslav Hrabry, who's the Prince of Krakow, and his Holy Roman Empire allies. This is in 1012 A.D. It's been 1,000 years of nonstop European invasion, at least one every 2-3 generations. I guess they get like lemmings, and there's just too many Europeans, and they need to go jump off a cliff somewhere and die off, and then they decide that cliff is Russia. I mean, we've been fighting even when we defeated at the Battle of Kulikovo Polye, Dmitry Donskoy, whose remains, by the way, were just found because he's a saint. His remains were found. They had been missing for at least I think since the Soviet Union took over, about 100, so 1920, so 100 years, and they were found and ideally preserved. That was something that hit the news. When Dmitry Donskoy was fighting Mamayev and the Mongols under Mamayev from the western portion of the Golden Horde, or what was left of it, there were also European mercenaries, Arbaquars and others, and pikemen on the side of the Mongols. So it's like anywhere you turn, there's always some Europeans trying to attack Russia. It's just the tradition. Pretty much there isn't a single, there's almost no European nation or peoples that hasn't been that's been so lazy they couldn't get off their butt and go try to invade us, at least as a group, once in their history. The Danes, I think, are the only ones, but they're itching for a fight with Russia because they haven't gotten in the club of getting beaten down for whatever reason. I guess they want to be like everybody else. So there's that issue. I mean, look, let's keep this honest. Again, Ukraine isn't deciding anything here. They make little decisions in between. The big decisions are all made by the West. This is NATO. All right, and NATO is America. This is the Epstein elites and their sick fantasy of how they're going to destroy us. I mean, they don't want just to change the government, of course. They want to destroy Russia, carve it up into small pieces, 10, 20, 40, depends whose flight of fantasy it is. And then suck them dry, get them to fight each other, and use them against China. Do the same with China, balkanize India, and then feast on the remains of humanity. That's the only real plan of, quote, progress that the West has now. It's a parasitical entity. The West is a parasite on the rest of humanity. And we've seen that. Even production is basically gone out of the West. They need other people's resources because outside of the U.S., most of the West, well, except for maybe Australia and Canada, but outside of those three countries, the rest of the West is resource poor, is undereducated now, I mean, America has basically an illiteracy rate of almost 50%, 53%. 21 total illiteracy rate, according to last year's statistics from the citizens, adult citizens, and 32% partial literacy. If you're reading at the fifth grade level and you're an adult, you're basically illiterate. And they need brain. They need to suck out the brain drain out of the other countries. They need the resources out of countries. They need the gold out of countries. And by the way, Trump, the $12 billion from the sale of Venezuelan oil that was supposed to go to Venezuela, that's also missing, and nobody knows where it went. $12 billion, pocket change. Trump's offshore slush accounts, and the $4 billion,
by the way.
Yeah, and the $4 billion in gold that the British were holding. Well, they froze. Has now been transferred to America. Venezuelan. It's Donnie the Pirate. Donnie the Pirate King of the Caribbean. So there you go. That's the modern West.
I think that's the problem, Stas. I think it is far different from what Donald Trump was talking about before being elected. It was all about production, jobs back in the United States. But the move on Venezuela, it somehow made some sort of delusional strategy on his part, because he thought that it's going to be as easy and big and beautiful as Venezuela was so far. As you've mentioned, the United States sold something like $13 billion of Venezuelan oil. And they gave them $448 million. Nothing is getting back to Venezuela. But the problem is that's not going to bring the jobs back and production back to the United States. That may help them to dominate the energy market somehow. And many people would argue that the whole agenda on the part of Donald Trump himself, which was different from the Israeli one, was to come to the West Asia, control the Persian Gulf, control the oil market in the Persian Gulf, because they had the dominance over GCC countries. If something happens to Iran, then it's going to be all under the thumb of the United States.
Yep.
This is what was the plan, but it didn't work so far. And the question is, how do you see Donald Trump dealing with these two wars? The war in Ukraine, as you mentioned, how is it going right now? It seems that they want to continue the war. And in the West Asia, the same. They're getting back to economic war. That it's going to be a war of attrition. It's some sort of attrition, because it's all about the economy and nobody knows how is it going to work for the United States. This is how many times did they try that? It just lost it.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. Donald Trump shot American manufacturer in the forehead long before he tried something in Venezuela. It's called tariffs. Run along with me on this little story, this little adventure story. So Donald Trump slams 20%, 30%, 500%. It varies on a day-to-day basis. Tariffs on all these suppliers. Well, the problem for that is American manufacturers. Well, first of all, there was enough dumb people that said, "Oh yeah, we're going to make the evil manufacturers pay the extra tariffs." Yeah, they're going to make. No, dumbasses, you get to pay the extra tariffs. Tariffs are always passed on to the final consumer. True, somebody in the middle may swallow a little bit of that, but if a company, by the way, if a company pays more in tariffs and doesn't pass it on as the cost to the consumer, guess what happens? That means their profit margin falls. They just pay less in taxes at the end of the year. So either way, there's no free lunch. There's a Russian saying, the only free cheese is in the mousetrap. And how many Americans put their heads in that mousetrap, believing Donald Trump and the other moron that he's got called Besant, who outside of crashing other countries' currencies for Mr. Soros. By the way, that's why I love that. The MAGA crowd. Oh, Soros is evil, but his right-hand man is fine with us because works for Uncle Donnie now, so that's all good. Yeah, because they're all enemies. Really, they are. Oh yeah, they're real enemies. They hate each other, just like the Bushes and the Clintons hate each other. They hate each other so much they've been intermarrying since the 1500s. I mean, that was proven, and you can go find and look it up. There's been several genealogical studies done to prove it. They were local nobility in two towns outside of London from the 1500s. So this is how ridiculous it is. So let's go along this little trip. The problem is the U.S. imports. It imports a lot. I mean, in fact, it imports most everything these days. So even if you're an American manufacturer, chances are at least some of your sub-assemblies or materials are coming from abroad, probably from China, a very good chunk of it, other countries, South Korea. So you're importing materials, right? And then you're putting them together. So at least partially you are getting some of your parts tariffed by whatever American tariffs is. Now, if you're inside the U.S., you may actually still be better off than somebody that fully manufactures their goods outside of the U.S. and imports it into the U.S. You may have a bit of an edge, maybe, depending on just how much of your materials are tariffed. And just by the way, and then you got the rest of your cost of manufacturing, your labor, your insane amounts of American bureaucracy that is on the federal, state, municipality levels. The state and municipality levels, Trump can't do anything about it because that's the state and municipality levels. And this is the problem of turning around manufacturing in the U.S. The insane state environmental laws. I don't want, everybody wants a job, but just we don't want the factory in our backyard. That's the problem. They're like little children. We want it all. We want to be rich and we want to have jobs, but not where I can see them. It doesn't work that way, ladies and gentlemen. That's just the reality of life. Something always has to give. Okay, so that's internal market in the U.S. Now let's look at what happens when American companies try to succeed. I mean, try to compete with just about any other country in any other country's market. So I'm a Chinese company, or hell, I'm a Malaysian company, and I'm selling to, I don't know,
It seems that we've lost Stas. Can you hear me, Stas?
Yeah. Let's say I'm a Malaysian company and I'm selling to, I don't know, Italy. So if I sell to America, whatever I'm selling to America gets tariffed. If I'm selling to Italy, it doesn't get tariffed. So it's whatever my cost. My $100 it costs over there, and I sell it for $100. And if I sell it to the U.S., it's $150, 50% tariffs. Let's just say. While the American manufacturer might not have, might still become cheaper because of that than me. Now, having said that, the problem is if the American manufacturer has to use my parts or anybody else's parts that's imported into you.
Yeah, we've lost you. Your picture is frozen, Stas. Can you hear me? You're back. Can you check your VPN if your
VPN is off? VPN's off.
Okay.
It's just the internet. So any American company that now exports anywhere in the world, whatever sub-assemblies or materials it's importing, those have been tariffed. So its manufacturing costs have just gone up, and even and it may have been barely competitive before. It's no longer competitive now. And if other countries are also putting additional tariffs, counter tariffs on America, it's even less competitive. So American companies manufacturing in the U.S. have become uncompetitive.
Yeah, we have the same issue here.
Yeah. So sorry, I was cursing under my breath for the internet. So the tariffs. I mean, tariffs and the way they've been applied. And by the way, they also create this instability because they're applied, taken away, changed on a whim. There's no plan. Do I invest in a new manufacturing facility in America? Well, are the tariffs going to be there in 2 months? Are they going to be there tomorrow? And Donald Trump is absolutely unpredictable factor of, I ate your cottage cheese from your country. I really like to take the tariffs off. Like, do I want to make the cottage cheese factory in your country when the tariffs may come off tomorrow? And it just business doesn't like ambiguity, and it freezes any future investment. So Trump has done everything he can to make sure that A, people don't invest in America, and B, American companies aren't competitive outside the U.S. I mean, in his own insane approach to economics, which is basically as a sophomoric as possible, he's doing massive amounts of damage. He's that drunken cocaine high elephant in a China room, or in a room full of China. So there, or porcelain, whatever you want to call it, crystal. And there's that. Now, having said that, then we go to the two wars. Look, Trump hasn't given up on Project Ukraine. But if you look at Project Ukraine from a step back, and you look at Project Iran from a step back, they look a lot alike. They're just running on slightly different cycles. Oh, we're going to make sure they're paying. Oh, they want to negotiate. Oh, we're almost at a deal. Oh, they've backstabbed me. Oh, and it's the same cycle. And the Ukraine thing's the same cycle. Oh, we want them to also be friends. Oh, we're going to be, we're the neutral guy. Oh, we're giving everything to Ukraine. Oh, we're going to do deep strikes to punish them. Oh, we're going to be the neutral party again. It's like, it's a cyclical concept on both. There's two cycles just spinning around. Now, having said that, so it's more or less becoming predictable. Okay, what day are we on? It's like the lunar cycle. Is it a full moon? No, it's a new moon. Okay, how much time do we have before the next Trump is going to exterminate our nations? And it's just, and nobody's. I don't think on the negotiating side, on the international level, anybody's even paying attention anymore. Because he, pardon my French, he's full of shit. I mean, that's I think that's the conclusion everybody's come to. The guy is nuts. He's obviously there's enough dementia kicking in that his ability to make decisions or tell the truth has been even more degraded than it was before. And at this point, nobody's really paying attention to him. I mean, he's destroyed Iran like I think 48 times now. What day are we on? 49. Meanwhile,
left. Yeah.
Meanwhile, the U.S. has $40 trillion in debt, and it just spent $20 billion by selling its euros to Japan to keep the Japanese from dumping the American treasury bills, because Japan is in a yet again another crisis. That, by the way, America created for it 30 years ago, and Japan is basically bankrupt. It's like 280%, maybe 290% debt to GDP. Nothing major. You try running that if you're a family. But to keep the Japanese from selling treasury bills, because now oil's gotten so much more expensive, and the Japanese overstretched budget was never meant for that. They are the biggest holder of treasury bills in the U.S. If they start mass selling, everybody's going to run for that market. And the only way to keep and when you run for the market, I mean to dump their treasury bills, where they can still get something out of them. The only way to counter that is to increase the percentage. Like I said, the 30 years of 5.7, the 10 year is a 4.7 or 4.6, somewhere around that point. So it hits the 5%. That psychological barrier of your goose is cooked. The U.S. is spending $1 trillion to pay for the interest on its debt, not to pay down its debt, but the interest on its debt. And since it doesn't have that extra $1 trillion, it borrows that $1 trillion, which it now has to also pay interest. And this is what's called circling the toilet bowl. And the U.S. economy is circling the toilet bowl. I mean, the U.S. can always, countries can always just renege on their debts. But if the U.S. does that, and the U.S. has to import massive amounts of everything to survive because its manufacturing base is extremely depleted, and lots of other issues it has, including resource gathering allocation, it's not going to be able to do it. If it kills the dollar, that's the golden goose. But the dollar's dying anyways. And weaponizing the dollar is only accelerated by decades, probably, if not more. So what's the U.S. going to do? Well, it's going to make a vault of minerals. You heard that, right? About Trump's vault of minerals. What are you going to do with those? By the way, for those that don't understand, for example, iron, because I've seen this firsthand because I worked. I was a consultant in an iron enrichment plant, so I walked the floor, learned the whole processes of this. When you take or nickel or any other of these materials, when these materials, they're not trace elements, but they're veins. But you're not sitting there with a little chisel taking them out, right? Like trying to find the vein. You're blowing up a camera or a chamber. I'm sorry, camera is in Russian. You're blowing up a chamber in a mountain, inside of a mountain, as an example, pulling out all the rubble, which is just mostly rock. And then you have to process that rock to get the iron or the nickel, whatever materials out of there. So what you do is you have to then take it to a metal enrichment plant. What does that mean? You take all this massive tons upon tons of rock, granite mostly in this case, to one of these plants, and it starts breaking gigantic slabs of rock down to something about that big. And something about that big, when it's like minuscule pebbles, you start working on it with chemical bleaching, electrolysis, or magnets to pull that ore out. And then all the slag gets tossed aside because what do you need the extra crushed granite for? I mean, I guess you could use it for road construction, but you don't need it. You need the iron ore, or you need the nickel ore, and those are big plants, giant grinders of different forms and formats, and then you take that enriched pellets of iron ore, and all that gets loaded onto train cars or heavy trucks, or better yet, ships, and that goes to a smelter, and a smelter smelts it into ingots of different purity and different alloys and so on, and then that goes to some other facility that that cuts those ingots and either melts them down and casts them into some kind of form, or uses stamping machines to open die or closed die machining, stamping, and then machines them as needed. That's a cycle of manufacturing. The U.S. is missing a very large chunk of that cycle of manufacturing, but Trump is going to get the ore. I don't know what the hell he's going to do with it if you're missing the next step and the next step and the next step. You're actually better off starting at the top and working your way down, because you can import those ingots and manufacture them into something while you're setting up resetting up the next step to create those ingots and so on. But from bottom up, it doesn't work. What are you going to do with that iron ore when it's just massive amounts of granite that then has to be worked out? I worked at a mining facility on a project in Turkey, and it was gold. And for 1 ton of rock, they were getting about 3 or 4 ounces of gold. Maybe more, maybe 10, 12 ounces of gold. That's not much for a ton of rock. And that gold had to be chemically bleached. So again, you had to break that rock down into little rocks, very little rocks, and work it in very corrosive chemicals, including arsenic, to get that gold bleached out of that rock. I mean, that's how things work. That's the reality. So just because you can open up mining mines and get a lot of rock out, what do you do with that rock if you don't have the next step? But Donald Trump doesn't understand any of that. Besson doesn't understand any of that. These people are very ignorant about how economies work. They're extremely ignorant about how manufacturing works. If you ask anybody in that area, they can tell you anything. It goes from ore to magical planes and battleships like that. That's the whole concept, I think, of the economic team surrounding Donald Trump these days. So, this is ludicrous, and they're going to wait out Iran that's been under sanctions for 47 years. Just like they're going to break Russia. You know how many years Russia's been under sanctions?
It's been, no, I don't know, actually.
Over 160. Oh, yeah. I mean, we entered World War I, and we continued trading with the Germans for like the first year and a half of that war. But we entered World War I under sanctions from the British and the French, our allies. Let that sink in. I mean, this is how we've been under sanctions like 160 years, maybe even longer. It's ludicrous. And did we crash? No. So now you get. I was on Iranian TV last week, and the journalist, she asked me about how it's going to stand up and all this, and what about the sanctions? I said, why do we care? I mean, be honest. Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, Belarus. That's 200. That's almost 200 million people. I mean, I'm sorry, 200 million. It's almost 2 billion people. That's twice the population of the West. That's most of the world's manufacturing these days, by the way, and most of the world's resources. And that's not to mention Russia's pulling in the Sahel, building nuclear power plants down there so they can have not just electricity, but be able to walk their way up the value chain and manufacture. You've got maybe India, but hell, who knows? They tend to be easily bought out. But there's other countries lining up, even Afghanistan, which is resource rich, because the modern Taliban is, on some issues, when the country developed, they're very different from the old Taliban. There's other countries involved. They're going to be joining. So, honestly, pardon my French, screw the West. We can live without them. That was my message in nicer terms. She was a nice lady. I didn't want to be rude, but the reality is, screw the West. We can live without them. And if Latin America or Brazil has the best chance, obviously, because of its size, can break out of the American orbit and join the rest, then really, I mean, okay, fine. The Europeans and the Americans are sanctioning us. Woo! The deindustrialized West is sanctioning us. Woo! Okay, whatever. Goodbye. Let's sit behind your wall.
Brazil, I think the situation with Brazil is right now is obvious for anybody who lives in Brazil. They know that their future is with the East, because they look at the trades, and they don't have that much of trade with the United States today. You see Donald Trump coming out 25% on the Brazilian economy, and this is not friendly.
Really? Today?
Yeah, 25% on Brazil.
Why
He was supposed to put 50%. He said, because I don't like, he said, Donald Trump said, I don't like the current president of Brazil. I'm in favor of the the previous one, and I'm going to help his son that he's in. This is just unbelievable. How can you interfere in the internal affairs of a country, and you're trying to, by putting pressure on their economy? And he even goes after the judiciary system here in Brazil. It's unbelievable what's going on with Donald Trump. And the other point is Donald Trump, there is a clip, I'm going to play it for you. He's talking about the debt. And since day one, he was all talking about debt. And here is what we know from the statistics, that during his first administration, the debt was 20. And right now it's 40. In 9 years, it doubled. It's huge what's going on. And
how long did it take the U.S. to get to $1 trillion in debt? It went from 1776 to, I think, 1980 or 1981 when it got to 1 trillion.
Yeah.
So 200 years to get to the first trillion, and now we're at 40 trillion. Less than 40 years later. Yeah. That's
here is Donald Trump.
Debt, because remember, we have $34 trillion in debt. Got to pay it off. We're going to pay down debt. We're going to reduce the hell out of the debt. We're going to pay off debt. The $35 trillion in debt, we're going to pay it off. We're going to get it done fast, too. Pay off debt. Pay off a lot of the debt, and we have plenty of it. We'll start paying off debt. We want growth in our country. That's what's going to pay off our debt. We're going to give back a lot of money into the Treasury and pay down debt. We're going to work on national debt very strongly, by the way. We are going to grow to start paying down our debt. We have $35 trillion in national debt. We're all set to do it. We're going to make a lot of money. We're going to pay down debt. We're going to make so much money. We're going to pay off debt. We're going to pay off our debt. We're going to do things that you wouldn't believe. We're going to make our country so competitive.
Yeah.
Send me that video, please. That's beautiful. Well, the problem with MAGA, what's left of MAGA, is they're cold they're cultists. You know, Donald Trump isn't Donald Trump. You don't understand. You're dealing with a 10-dimensional being of massive proportion that's projecting into our 3-dimensional world the figure of Donald Trump. You cannot argue with the wisdom of Donald Trump. The being is everywhere. It's playing 1 billion D chess. So that's, I mean, you talk to some of these people. I mean, these mega cultists, MAGA cultists that are, you know, the ones that are diehard. You can't get it through their heads. No. They'll believe whatever he says. That's cult of personality.
I think for those people who are trying to negotiate with Donald Trump, this is one of the main concerns. The guy doesn't mean what he says. That's the problem. This is, you know, when you look at Russia, look at China, look at Iran, they really mean what they say. They know what they want. They know what is the objective of talks, negotiations, and what is the short-run strategy, you know, and long-run strategy and the objectives. But you don't see that happening with the United States. Nobody's talking about it. Even they sign MOU with Iran, and then they say, and we were supposed to, do something about the strategic, reserves of the United States. That was the whole plan. This is not the way you run a country. You negotiate. There is no negotiations going on. And for those people who are, I don't know the situation in Russia, but in Iran, who are saying, oh, we have to negotiate, we have to do, there is nothing happening, by the way. This is the reality. This is the sad reality of what we're facing today.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's worse, my brother. He doesn't just not mean what he says. I don't think he remembers. I mean, honestly, how much does he even remember what he says? I mean, he's just talking off the cuff. He's whatever he's making up. I don't think he remembers it 5 minutes later. It's whatever hits his brain first. There's no filter. I think the filter is damaged, very damaged. That's what a lot of people are saying around him. So there's no, you know how many times he said, oh, we and the Chinese have come up to negotiations. They've asked me for negotiations. The Chinese are like, oh, we haven't been any negotiation. Yeah, well, okay, fine. We haven't negotiated, but they really want to do what I want them to do. It's like, what? It's like, it's becoming more and more like dealing with with like a 10-year-old kid. You broke that. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. I saw you break that. He did it. That's the type of mentality you're dealing with. Except this is an 80-year-old man that has at his disposal a large enough military that's still somewhat functional and can play all kinds of havoc on the financial markets and on the real economy. And that's the unfortunate part. But I mean, it's like dealing with a 10-year-old with a very huge ego. I wouldn't bet on the U.S. economy at this moment. That's my financial advice for whatever it's worth.
Stas, where do you see Europe in the war in Ukraine? Where do they want? What do they want from Ukraine? Because so far, with what has happened, and let's assume Donald Trump continuing with the same policies that as we've seen so far. But the end game in Europe, do you understand what is the end game in Europe? What do they really want from Ukraine that they haven't achieved so far?
Well, what they want for Ukraine is for it to destroy Russia and for Russia to fall apart in little pieces and for them to feast on the Russian resource and economy for the next 200 years. That's what they really want. As my grandfather used to say, it's never bad to want something. Yeah, it doesn't mean you're going to get it.
My question is, Stas, I want to be more specific because Europe today, if we put all of them together, it doesn't mean that much, in my opinion, because you have to separate all these countries, and they're feeling this way as time goes by, in my opinion. Yep. And how do you see that dynamic in Europe and the countries coming out and considering their own, sovereign policies and the strategies?
Well, part of this war is not just a war of attrition on the battlefield, which is showing its results now. A very large part of this is a war of attrition on economies and politics against the Europeans. I said in 2023, I was saying when I first started all of this, I was saying, the number one victim or target for the Americans is going to be the Europeans, the EU. And the EU, by the way, the unelected portion of the EU, that parliament, if you want to call it that, the EU government has used this whole crisis to grab as much power as they can. I mean, if you look at the member provinces, you can't even call them countries anymore. They're provinces. They're not countries. Their elections are subsumed in any which way and tampered with that Brussels decides. Brussels passes 90% of their laws. I mean, they are all provinces. They are mindless, helpless provinces at this point that are trying to still show that they're really big boys and girls that can do what they want. But, and a few of them are having some success. Well, Hungary had a lot of success until they really started working it over. Now Hungary's going to be poor, broke, and dumbed down. Magyar is going to do a job on them like they have no idea. But they wanted to be like the rest of Europe, and they got tired of living better. So now they're going to get to it. At this point, the attrition war is what it is. Destruction of the economy. Russia's desires to keep the Europeans out of this war as long as possible. I mean, as a full engagement, and allow their economies to collapse and their people to go and eat their elites, quite literally, possibly, coming up this winter. The EU needs to hurry this along and maybe join this war, but they're having problems with, convincing their people to go fight. Though I think the Ukrainization of, press gangs in Germany or other places is the future, whether they know that or not. So there's these two countercurrents. Russia's hoping that there'll be government switches or collapses, and that'll avoid war. The Europeans are betting on the other side that we can at least do something to rearm or buy from the Americans, and then hopefully Ukraine will just be able to stand and fight long enough to buy us the time we need. So there's two counter bets. Only one of them is going to be right. I think some of these governments, we're going to see this fall and this winter when energy prices are going to continue skyrocketing, where diesel is going to be out. So even if you have enough products, getting them to the market is going to be a very difficult concept if diesel is short. It's not just a matter of, here's the point. It's not just a matter of prices going up. Prices went up when the European Union members were dumb enough to cut off Russian gas and buy American gas. Which, by the way, a lot of American companies several times bought Russian LNG, added on 40, 50% or 100% to the price and resold it to the Europeans as American LNG, freedom molecules. Freedom isn't free. But there was still enough gas on the market. There's still enough oil on the market. It just became a lot more expensive because of who you were buying it from. There's not enough diesel on the market. There's not enough gas on the market now. It's just, you cut 20% out, you're going to feel it. And you're now in a competitive bidding process with everyone else. And guess what? Southeast Asia has more money than Europe. East Asia has more money than Europe. That's the simple fact of it. Yes, Africa is going to suffer worse than all. Latin America is going to suffer a lot outside of the richer countries like Brazil. Argentina is screwed because its economy has been screwed ever since it linked it to the U.S. 100 years ago. It's been a basket case. Argentina was considered the Americas of South America. That didn't last too long. They hitched their horse to a very, very wrong wagon. So they've got. I mean, there's these massive issues on the horizon. There's just simply not going to be enough diesel, no matter what price you're willing to pay for it. There's just not enough. What are you going to do with it? You can throw all the gold you want at the field of the empty field. It's not going to suddenly grow grain for you. And that's the problem. That's the problem with the Europeans. So we'll see. We're going to see how this fall heats up. It's going to be a very warm fall, if you know what I mean. And winter's probably going to be even hotter. So people don't. It's one thing people are hungry themselves. It's another thing they're watching their kids getting skinnier and skinnier, whining that their stomachs are turning. They don't have any food in there, and watching their lips turn blue from the cold. People tend to get really upset. Like bloodthirsty upset when they see their kids going through that. They can do it themselves maybe and not go over the edge. But when they're seeing their children dying of hunger and cold, they tend to get very, very take it very personally. So it's going to be an interesting thing for the Europeans. They haven't. Europe hasn't. Most of Europe, let me phrase that, particularly Central Western Europe, hasn't dealt with famine in probably almost 100 years. But at least for lower classes, that's what we're looking at. I'd hoard, by the way, if I were you. While prices are still adequate, you take the staples and you just start hoarding them and hide them so that your neighbors don't know and the government doesn't know, because it gets taken away if they do. That's the whole point. You look too well fed while everybody else is hungry. They start to take notice. Like, old Dirk there, he seems to be very rosy cheeked while we're all starving. That's the problem with hoarding, though. Sooner or later, somebody figures it out. They're looking too well fed. So that's societal breakdown.
I think it's tragic. We have to laugh. Yeah.
It is. It's just, but you know what? The Europeans did it to themselves. And I'm talking about the people. Yeah. Flat out, it's the people that did it to themselves. You pay for and support the governments you have. You don't overthrow them. You don't kick them out. You don't put in irrational people. You believe their lies. You walk off the cliff. And right before you hit, you go, how dare they lie to me? You knew they were lying to you. I mean, look at the German electricity program. It doesn't exist. It's built on farts and fairy dust. Look, the two big problems for green energy in Germany, besides green energy is never efficient. It's incredibly expensive. It rarely ever pays for itself on its input costs. But the big problem with green energy in Germany is solar and wind. Let's see. In wintertime, the wind's not blowing very much in Germany. And there isn't much sun. And by the way, you also got to clean off the snow off of the snow and the ice off the solar panels. And there isn't much sun. So, if you're relying on that, you're really screwed. It's not just going to get expensive. It just doesn't get generated. But the way the Germans have dealt with this when they blew up their, in their ever great wisdom, blew up their nuclear power plants, the way they dealt with that was that you're buying electricity from the French, from their nuclear power plants. But the French nuclear power plants are down for some reason, because of maintenance issues, because of water levels in the rivers. And because having lost the Sahel, the French are now having to pay 5 times more for the uranium.
This is a German cycle. I think they have destroyed Germany by Nazism. Again, they're destroying Germany. They found their way to destroy Germany again and again and again and again. They're not going to learn from anything, in my opinion.
They don't have to come and beat us. We'll do it ourselves. Just hold my beer.
It's
we'll
unbelievable.
starve ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was going to just add one thing. Liberal ideas sound really cool to a lot of people, and good virtue signaling when you're rich. The problem is you start following those liberal ideas, you don't stay rich, and then they don't sound so good anymore when you're actually poor now. That's the reality.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stas, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you for allowing me to babble. My apologies for the being late. It was kind of out of my hands. So
no problem.